Turn your Bibles to Daniel chapter 2, verse 39. We're going to be looking at the dream of Nebuchadnezzar again, and this is the fourth part of our series on that. Reading in Daniel chapter 2, verse 39, it says, "But after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to yours. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." The image seen by Nebuchadnezzar in his dream represented a succession of world kingdoms, beginning with his reign in Babylon. Now we understand that the Babylonian Empire existed long before Nebuchadnezzar, but the dream begins with Nebuchadnezzar, his reign in Babylon. The reign of Nebuchadnezzar began in 605 BC, which was the height of the Babylonian Empire, and it lasted until 539 BC, when the empire was overthrown by Cyrus the Persian in conjunction with his uncle Darius the Mede. The Medo-Persian Empire was in power from 539 BC until 331 BC, when it was overthrown by Alexander the Great. The Babylonian Empire conquered Judah and took the Israelites into captivity that lasted some 70 years. While this was God's judgment on an apostate Israel, the treatment of the Jews under Babylon was relatively benign. Under the rule of the Persians, it was Cyrus the king that allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple and the city walls. Again, the treatment of the Jews under the Persians was relatively benign. The third kingdom, which we are going to be talking about tonight, is the Greek Empire, and is pictured in the dream as the belly and thighs made of bronze, and said to be a kingdom that would rule over all the earth. As silver is inferior to gold, bronze is inferior to silver. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the gold head. The Persians were the silver chest and arms of the image. And the Greek Empire is bronze. And bronze is inferior to silver. As such, the Greek Empire was inferior in both its wealth and its duration as compared to the Persian Empire. The Greek Empire was established by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was born July 20th or 21st in 356 BC. As a young person, he studied under Aristotle until he was 18 years of age. Now, if you went to high school, you probably took ancient history, and names like Alexander the Great and Aristotle and Plato, vaguely are there in the back of your brain. At least you've read about them. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher who he himself studied under Plato from the age of 18 until he was 37 years of age. Aristotle's writings were the first comprehensive system of Western philosophy. Upon the death of Alexander, Aristotle was denounced for not holding the gods in honor, and he fled for his life. But he died of natural causes in 332 BC, in case you don't remember that about Aristotle. Alexander succeeded his father, Philip II of Macedon, in 336 BC, after Philip was assassinated. He was already the general of the Greek army, and as the emperor, he used the power of his army to expand the Greek Empire, which was one of the largest empires of the ancient world, ranging from Greece to what is now Pakistan. If you can picture that in your mind, that's an awful lot of territory. Daniel's explanation of the dream says that he shall rule over all the earth. The extent of his kingdom was essentially the known and inhabited earth of Daniel's time. Now we know that there were people living in Europe, there were people living in Africa, there were people living in Asia, but this was the known world of Daniel's time. And Alexander had pretty well conquered everything. It was said that Alexander boasted that he had conquered the world and then sat down and wept because there was not another world to conquer. He was undefeated in battle, and he is considered to be one of history's most successful commanders. Now let's talk about the Greeks. This is the empire. We need to understand something about these people. The Greeks were descendants of Javan, the fourth son of Japheth, and Javan was a grandson of Noah. They migrated to and settled in the area that we know as Turkey and Greece. So if you think of Noah and his sons and their wives leaving the ark at Mount Ararat, coming down into Mesopotamia, and then in time people began to migrate in the four different directions of the compass. Javan, the son of Japheth, his people moved west and slightly a little bit to the north to Turkey, and then over the Aegean Sea into what we know as Greece. Ancient Greece was divided into 5 parts. The first part is Epirus, the second is Peloponnesus, then there's Greece proper, Thessaly, and Macedonia. I hope you're taking notes. You will have a test. You must pass this course. I'm joking. At least remember Greece, okay? If you picture the geography in Greece in your mind, get that picture, you will see an appendage dropping down from Eastern Europe, separated from Asia Minor by the Aegean Sea. Remember, just a little coming down out of Eastern Europe there. Epirus was located on the west side of this appendage, okay? The west side, that would be looking towards Italy, okay? Peloponnesus was a peninsula at the south and joined to the rest of the Greece by the Isthmus of Corinth. Remember the Corinthians letters in the New Testament. Corinth is located on that little stretch of land that joins Greece proper to the Peloponnesus below it. Greece proper was directly north of the Peloponnesus, and Thessaly and Macedonia were to the north of Greece proper. Now Javan had 4 sons who settled these areas and became the heads of the different branches or tribes of the Greek nation. And when I say Greek nation, if you're familiar with Greek history, it was not a united nation, it was an area of city-states. Each little city was like its own little kingdom. And then the areas where these cities were would be divided into the various tribes. Now the eldest son of Javan was Elisha, and he settled in the Peloponnesus, that bulb down at the bottom there that's connected by the Isthmus of Corinth. Traces, the second son, settled in Greece proper. Chittim, the third son, settled in Macedonia, and Dodanim, the fourth son, along with his descendants, settled in Thessaly and Epirus. As the families separated from each other, their language corrupted into 4 different dialects known as Attic, Ionic, Doric, and Aeolic. You may remember that from your high school ancient history. You may not, depending on who your teacher was and how interested he or she was in bringing out that kind of information. But if you've ever studied Greek, the Greek language, you will encounter these different dialects. Greek history is divided into 4 periods of time. The first period of time is a time of petty kingdoms. I talked about the city-states, which began sometime before 2000 BC. I'm not sure, I couldn't find an exact date, but sometime before 2000 BC, and it lasted for about 1,000 years. It's a long time. It's a long time. The second period of Greek history begins after the siege of Troy, somewhere around 1180 BC, and lasts to the reign of the Persian king Darius the Great in 522 BC. So that second period lasted somewhere around 660 years. The third period of Greek history lasted from Darius the Great, his time, to the death of Alexander, which was about 198 years. And then the final period of Greek history lasted from the death of Alexander to the final subjection of Greece under the Roman Empire in 146 BC. So altogether, the Greek history had a total duration of about 2,150 years. It's a long time for a national history to exist. Now, Alexander the Great lived until June 10th or 11th, 323 BC. He had tried to extend his empire to what he called the ends of the world and to the great outer sea by invading India in 326 BC. So, here he was, he pressed his way out across, Israel, Babylonia, Persia, down as far as into Pakistan. Below that is India. And he tried to press on into India. And what he called the Great Outer Sea, in all probability, was the Indian Ocean. He didn't quite make it. He was eventually forced to turn back at the demand of his army. And he returned to Babylon, the city that he had planned to use as the capital of his empire. And if you could picture that in your mind, the city of Babylon would be almost in the middle, geographically, of the Greek Empire. So that was his plan. Go back to Babylon, establish this as his capital. However, he died in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II at the age of 32. That's young. Now stop and think. This young man had conquered the then known world. This young man was the general of the Greek army. This young man defeated the Persian Empire, which, if you remember from our discussion last time, the Persians focused their education, especially for their young men, on the military. And they were able to defeat the Babylonians. What kind of a military mind did Alexander have? That at such a young age, he could lead troops and they would follow him into combat. He never lost a battle. A young man. That's something. Now, admittedly, some of the armies that he had to face were pretty run down and disheveled and not worth much of anything because, he had walked over people that had existed for a long time before him, the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Wasn't much left of them. The Persians, by the time he got there, began to decline, and corruption was setting in, as we studied last time. So there wasn't really an organized, excited and zeal of these people to defend themselves that much. And this young whippersnapper comes along with the greatest army of the time and conquers the world. But he died at the age of 32. It is possible that he had been assassinated by poisoning. But the record is not clear, because there is also the possibility he may have died of malaria or typhoid fever. The record is not clear. Alexander had no legitimate heir. As he was dying, he was asked to whom he wanted to bequeath his kingdom. And he answered, to the strongest. In other words, let them fight it out among themselves. And he died. The empire subsequently was divided into 4 parts, administered by his generals, between whom there was constant rivalry. And this rivalry continued for generations and completely undermined the Greek Empire. This story is the subject of later prophecies in the book of Daniel, and we will cover those when we get there. It's really a sad story, how the empire was really focused on one man, Alexander. And even though his generals had worked with him, were much older people than themselves, when he died, hey, he gave them no direction. And one thought, well, I need to be the emperor, and the other thought, I need to be the emperor. And they just had this continual war among themselves for generations. Divided a kingdom into 4 parts and weakened it, so that when the Romans came along, there was nothing really to stand up against them. Now, while the Jews had fared well under the Babylonians and under Persia, they did not fare so well under the Greek Empire. Judah was constantly caught between the warring factions of the divided Greek Empire. The empire from Egypt would come up and try to fight that which was in Persia. And then the Persians would come back and fight the Egyptians. And then they would go against the Macedonians, and just back and forth. And if you can just picture the geography in your mind, Israel, Judah, is on the road between all those places. So here comes an army marching through, and another army coming marching down. And they collide and they fight. Armies need to be fed. They need to be armed. They need replacements. So where did they go to get them? Well, here they were in Judah. Take the food, take the people, take the money, take the wealth. It was hard for the Jews under the Greek Empire. They, I guess you could say, kind of got spoiled in their captivity in Babylon. They got spoiled under the dominion of Persia. But boy, they paid a big price under the Greeks. And we will learn about that as we get into the other prophecies of Daniel. Some of the most awful events in the history of Israel happened at the hands of the Bronze Kingdom. Anyone ever hear of Antiochus Epiphanes? He's one of the Greek kings that really did harm to the Jews. So, in time, God poured out his judgment on this bronze kingdom using the iron legs and feet of the image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which we will encounter next time we study this image of Nebuchadnezzar's. So, the Greek Empire is that bronze kingdom which ruled over all the world, brought to end the Persian Empire, and itself was destroyed by the Roman Empire. Amen.